Good morning and welcome to the Watershed Institute and to day 2 of the 6th annual Watershed Conference. My name is Jim Waltman and I'm the Executive Director here at the Watershed Institute. The Watershed Institute integrates science, education, and advocacy in pursuit of clean water and healthy watersheds. And we're very fortunate to do that work housed on this beautiful, nearly 1,000-acre nature reserve. We acknowledge that that reserve, of course, was part of the traditional and ancestral territory of the Lenape people. And we honor and respect the history that the Lenape brought and the leadership that continues today from the indigenous cultures in the conservation of land and water. We're delighted to have those of you. How many were here last Friday? Just curious. Good group of you. Okay, so you are the true gluttons, right? So thanks for coming back, and for those of you that weren't here last Friday, welcome to you. I know this is the kind of day that some of you, I'll call you the stormwater geeks, may rather be out inspecting basins and inlets and outlets and so forth. I think it's perhaps poetic that we have a little bit of rain here for this conference today. Today we're going to do a few things a little bit kind of keeping on the same theme, but we're going to talk about where we get the money to do all of these important actions that we learned about last week, and we're going to continue to learn about today. And I'm really delighted we also have a focus on education in some of the sessions today. Let me quickly thank the sponsors for this conference that have made this effort possible: New Jersey American Water, Princeton Hydro, Sustainable Jersey, Davie Resource Group, Seward Green, New Jersey Sustainable Business Council, and the New Jersey section of the AWRA. Thank you. And let me also thank the William Penn Foundation and the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation for supporting the work we do here at the Watershed Institute on stormwater policy. I want to thank our terrific speakers today. I also want to give a shout out to our staff. If you would please give my thank you. As you can imagine, this is a pretty spectacular enterprise. We have more than 200 people registered for the conference, and today we're basically running 6 conferences. We have 3 concurrent sessions, live and hybrid, and that has taken a lot of doing. I want to thank I can't thank everybody, but I want to recognize Mike Passaro, our policy director, for his leadership. Mike's in the back. I want to point out to one of the true unsung heroes at the Watershed Institute, this gentleman right here, Nicholas Ho, who's our GIS specialist and all-around tech genius, who is really responsible for making everything stay on track. And one more person, Pri Oliveira, who's hiding behind the machine somewhere behind the magic curtain. I don't think she's in the room, but she's really hustled to bring this conference together. So a couple quick additional things. We're really delighted to have DEP Commissioner Sean LaTourette join us today. He will be speaking in this room at 1 o'clock today, and he's got an important announcement to make that we're looking forward to learning about. We had to juggle today's agenda a little bit. So the session before then is going to end at 12:45. This is all in today's agenda, and the commissioner will start at 1 o'clock. So we know that's getting kind of late, and some of you will be getting a little bit hungry. We will have snacks for you, but please don't dwell. Please grab your snacks at 12:45 and then try to get back into this room as quickly as you can before the commissioner speaks at 1 o'clock. Finally, I want to mention we will be sending out a survey to all of you probably next week, and please help us improve this conference in future years by giving us your honest feedback on how you thought things went. Finally, let me just thank all of you for the work that you do. We have a terrific diversity of specialists in this room, from mayors to planners and engineers, advocates, and everything in between. All of you together are what are making our water clean, and we have a lot of work to do, but we have great aspirations, and it does feel like things are starting to move in the right direction a little bit. At least there's a better understanding of stormwater, impervious surfaces, how to manage it, the fact that climate change is changing the hydrology, and we need to take bold action to address that. And so I was talking to someone the other day, maybe even earlier this week. There's a lot to be pessimistic about, but there's a lot to be hopeful about. And all of us got out of bed this morning, right? So that means we have to have at least a kernel of hope. So in that spirit, let's carry on and continuing to do what needs to be done to protect and restore our watersheds. Okay. As we know, that work we need to do requires money. So that's the focus of this first session, this plenary session, is we call this paying for it all. And we have two terrific speakers. One of them is joining us online, and one of us is here in the room. I'm going to first introduce Ellen Kohler. So Ellen is the Director of Applied Research and Programs at the Water Center at the University of Pennsylvania. Ellen joined the Water Center after serving as the Program Director for Water Resources at the University of Maryland's Environmental Finance Center. Her work there focused on water resource management issues, challenging communities in the Mid-Atlantic region, particularly supporting multi-municipal collaborations to improve water quality and integrated water planning to address drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater management. She brings more than 25 years of experience. Ellen received her law degree from the University of Colorado at Boulder and a master's degree from the University of Michigan School of Natural Resources. And we're delighted to have Ellen here with us this morning.
Great. So. Thank you very much, Jim. I very much appreciate being invited to speak today about financing municipal stormwater management. As Jim mentioned, I have been working in this field for a while, and for the last 10 years, a lot of that work has been in partnership with communities and conservation organizations addressing water quality challenges in the Delaware River Basin. Since pollution that gets into our waterways through stormwater runoff is our biggest, and by that I mean widespread problem, water quality problem, that means that I've been working on stormwater management. So next slide, please. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Mike. So just a brief background about the Water Center. We are an applied research center. We're a team of 7. We do partner with others across the Penn campus and other partners off campus as well. We are currently working on about 15 projects. They have a geographic scope from Philadelphia in the Cobbs Creek watershed to the Mid-Atlantic to the Great Lakes in the Southeast, and as well as a national scope. The projects in general look at drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater systems and how they interact with our natural systems, our rivers and our streams. Next slide, please. So turning to our topic for the day. I'm not sure it's advancing for those of us online. But turning to the topic to the day, my comments are based on the work that I've done in Pennsylvania with Pennsylvania municipalities over the last 7 years, with the likelihood that much of that experience will translate to New Jersey. So as some of you may know, Pennsylvania implemented some significant changes to its MS4 permit program in 2017. And just to be sure everybody knows, MS4 stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. So it's a permit program for that stormwater management system. That permit is needed because much runoff from developed land is one of our main challenges in terms of causing impairments, causing water pollution, and that developed land is the result of land use decisions made at the municipal level. So many of the communities in Pennsylvania had MS4 permits, but they were only required at that point to be implementing the 6 minimum control measures. Some of you may be familiar, the public education, the good housekeeping, and those activities hadn't been a significant tax on their financial resources. But the new permit required that they also implement pollution reduction strategies, particularly focused on sediments and nutrients. So they had to reduce sediment loads by at least 10% and nutrient loads by 5%. So this new requirement was going to be a different kind of financial challenge for these communities, and they need to figure out a way to pay for that work. So starting point for that is to understand what municipalities needed to fund and finance in terms of their work. And so we needed to identify the components of those stormwater management programs. And when we started working with communities, we said, okay, what activities did you need to be funding and financing? Who are your partners and who are your revenue streams? Like these are and this combination across these 3 buckets, across activities, partners, and revenues, will be different for each community because we have different community sizes, we have different water quality challenges, we have different sets of partners, and potentially different revenue streams that could be brought to the table. So it'll look different, but there can be some similarities across communities as well. Next slide, please. And of course, as Jim mentioned in the opening, we have to consider all of this work in the context of climate change and the larger storm events that we are seeing. So when I start working with communities, I really actually start here because what residents come to municipal meetings to talk about is flooding. They do not come to talk about your MS4 permit. So I try to work with communities to talk about how can we use the MS4 permit to address your flooding and resiliency challenges that you have. Next slide, please. And the other consideration we have to, when we're putting together this kind of funding and financing picture, is knowing what assets we have out there, what water infrastructure we have out there, and the condition of that, of those existing assets, that existing infrastructure, and knowing where it is in that life cycle. Because we need to be budgeting across the entire life cycle of all of the stormwater management practices that we have in place. And as you can see, this is obviously a generalized graph, but generally speaking, when we start, when we put in, say, a new rain garden, or you put in a new stormwater inlet, so this applies for gray or green, those costs up front are generally more like 40% of the overall cost of that life cycle for that particular practice. So we need to be understanding that and budgeting for that across the life cycle of that practice. And we need to acknowledge that that rain garden, that stormwater inlet at some point is no longer going to function, is no longer going to provide the water quality benefits that, that your community needs. And so you have to plan for and budget for replacement. Next slide, please. When we look across the pollution reduction plans that Pennsylvania municipalities adopted, in terms of funding and financing strategies, most of them focused on relying on general fund dollars and grant funding. As this chart points out, there are multiple sources that we could be looking at. Each one has, its strengths and its weaknesses. Some of them cover just the initial capital cost of implementing that practice. Some of them allow you to also cover O&M, operations and maintenance. So it's important to understand which sources can help you fund which activities. It is also really important to understand that for a lot of communities, relying on grants is not going to be a great long-term strategy. If you have a small water quality problem and you've got, not that many projects that you need to implement, it might work. But for most municipalities, grant funding is not guaranteed. It's competitive, and it probably is not going to be a good source in the long run for meeting your needs. The other thing I want to mention in the context of this, looking at this graph is I've noted that, there are SRF and loan program funding and bond financing. We have seen communities use those sources to fund their stormwater management programs. But as a general matter, what I've seen across Pennsylvania communities, and particularly for smaller communities, elected officials and municipal managers are hesitant, at least, to go into debt for stormwater management. So this is an issue where we need to be, understanding that hesitancy, helping those community leaders understand when it is a good idea to look at debt financing in their community, and that doesn't mean that they're not doing a good job of managing the community finances. So when it's a good idea, and what sources they might have for that kind of funding. Next slide, please. So another consideration at the municipal level is, who should be responsible for those stormwater facilities. So this can, looking across your ordinances, there's a great tool that the Center of Watershed Protection has that'll help you review your code and ordinances so that you can see where you might be incentivizing impervious cover, and where you might want to be shifting some of that risk for managing the runoff from that impervious cover from the municipality to a private entity, so that you're shifting risk and shifting the cost of that asset management to the party who is seeking to build more impervious cover to the maximum extent practical, right? Like, I understand there's a huge amount of political will that makes this a little challenging, but it's something that each community should be thinking about, is where are we actually incentivizing impervious cover where we could be making a change. Next slide, please. And that's a financing and funding strategy, right? Like, if you don't have as much you have to manage, then that means you have a smaller bottom line. So another strategy here is to look across the capital improvement projects that you're going to be implementing at a municipal level, and making sure that you are taking every opportunity to include stormwater management in that planning and design and implementation process. It's often referred to as a dig once strategy. And one study showed that in Lancaster in Pennsylvania, that they were able to cut costs by as much as 45% by having this holistic approach to capital improvement project implementation. So absolutely something to think about in terms of how you're moving forward with other capital improvements and how you make sure you incorporate stormwater management in that work. Next slide, please. So road runoff is one area as well where you could be looking at what you're doing as a municipality and whether this is a place, one, for taking a dig once approach, but two, also where you might actually have some funding streams that you might be able to use for stormwater management. So in Pennsylvania, at least, the municipalities are responsible for managing a lot of road miles, and they actually get some revenue back from the state to be able to do that road maintenance. Making sure that that stormwater is running off of the road and maintaining that road surface is absolutely part of what that funding can be used for. And so thinking about how road runoff is part of the picture for your stormwater management plan at a municipal level is really important. And there may be opportunities for partnering across municipalities with respect to this kind of strategy as well. Next slide, please. So another program consideration is whether you're going to be implementing new stormwater management practices or whether you're going to be retrofitting existing ones. And there can be a role for each. And so some consideration for new ones, yeah, they might have a higher upfront cost, but they also might be more responsive to specific permit needs, or they may be more responsive to current community priorities. So for example, it might help you if you're going to be implementing projects at a park, for example, or you're going to be, putting in a new park or doing something at a park. It might be great to implement some stormwater practices there that, are partnered then with what your community goals are in terms of recreation, for example. Retrofitting, though, can have a lower upfront cost. The value of that retrofit really depends on where that stormwater management practice, where that asset is in its life cycle. If it's towards the end of its life cycle, that may not be the best investment for your municipality. It might be time to consider, replacing that, or not retrofitting it and waiting until it actually gets to the end of its life cycle. Land ownership can be an issue. Sometimes it's actually wonderful to be retrofitting because you already have a relationship with a landowner, you've already been able to put into that practice. So that can actually make retrofitting a good strategy depending on what your situation is with the landowner. Next slide, please. So and then, of course, another consideration in terms of putting together the funding and financing plan for a stormwater management program is sort of when are those costs, when are those funding needs going to hit you? Are there upfront costs that you have to, put in, that you have to realize to put in that BMP? And then, for example, if it's a grant program, be reimbursed later. Do you have those funds for that upfront cost or not? What's the timing of when those revenue streams might come in, and how does it impact the program's cash flow? If you're looking at general fund dollars, those come in, when does that actually, that probably gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of timing. But if you're looking at some other source of revenue, that might really impact when you could be looking at implementing projects. If you're looking at best management practices that could serve other community priorities, you'll need to consider the timing of those revenue streams that you're using to help implement the project too. And then it may be a question of whether there's another entity entirely that should be implementing that best management practice, and what's the timing for them of when they can actually do that work. Next slide, please. So it's really important to communicate, and I have a feeling that a lot of you in the room already understand this, that partnering and or collaborating is a financing strategy. Collaborating with others can help bring more capacity to your municipality. It can help you identify new and unique funding revenue streams. It can help augment the expertise that you already have on board at the municipal level. So it's really great to be thinking creatively about who you could be partnering or collaborating with. These are just some examples, in terms of county planning commissions, watershed organizations, universities that might be able to help you do, some kind of a, help you put together a feasibility study for a financing strategy, those kinds of things. And the kinds of activities that they may actually be able to help you with. So organizations like the Watershed Institute are wonderful in helping support with public education. And that means that's a cost that is going to be significantly reduced for that municipality. Grant writing, I worked with a municipality that has been partnering with the Watershed organization, and the organization has been the one bringing in a lot of grant dollars to get BMPs implemented. And so that can be incredibly significant for municipalities. It's really important in terms of thinking about partnering and collaborating at a municipal level that you recognize that doing this takes time. So it needs to be part of whoever's responsible for stormwater management at the municipal level. It needs to be part of their work plan to be able to allow them to spend time developing partnerships and maintaining collaborations. So that's one piece that I think some of us assume that can happen, or it should happen. But if we don't create the space and the time to actually make it happen, it's not likely to occur, and it really will be very challenging to sustain any kind of partnership or collaboration. Next slide, please. And then just another thing to think about is, are there ways that you can be leveraging existing administrative infrastructure? So this is a picture from the Derry Township Municipal Authority. This was a wastewater treatment authority in Derry Township in Pennsylvania. As you can see, it experienced some rather significant flooding. And as a result, the community started to consider whether it might not be a bad idea for the municipal authority, for the wastewater authority, to also become the manager for stormwater. They did a feasibility analysis. They found that actually they have very similar service areas. They looked at what was needed in terms of stormwater management and identified $11 million of repairs to the stormwater, to the gray infrastructure, the stormwater gray infrastructure, and about $15 million of green stormwater infrastructure that would help them meet their stormwater management and flooding needs. Is also really important to understand. They also decided to adopt a fee. They had a wonderful community engagement process in terms of doing a preliminary study around that fee, engaging the public, and making sure they had representatives from every stakeholder group before, as they considered that fee and what structure that fee should take. So they did a really wonderful job in terms of, making sure the community was on board throughout the whole process, so that they didn't have as much. There will always be pushback, but they didn't have as much pushback at the end of that process. And this makes a lot of sense, right? Because this is this municipal authority already has some great experience in terms of managing the gray infrastructure, right? Like they know how to, they were already managing a wastewater collection system, the stormwater system, so they had some expertise on board as well. And they had an administrative structure that allowed them to bill and receive the fees back in terms of that stormwater utility that they developed. So this is, not just using that existing administrative structure, but a different way to be partnering and collaborating as well. Next slide, please. So that's really what I wanted to run through, pretty quickly in terms of outlining some general ideas for financing and funding a stormwater management program. The major takeaways here are it's not just about money. There are ways that you can implement your program that don't necessarily mean you actually have to be the one managing that revenue stream coming in. And there are things that you can do to reduce the costs that you might be experiencing in terms of that stormwater management program. Really those, I'm not going to read through the bullets on the slide because they're pretty much, what I said before and a summary slide that y'all can look at later. So next slide, I think that's my last slide. And I don't know if we're doing questions now or after Charles's presentation. There we go.
Okay, there we go. Wonderful. So now I'm going to introduce our second speaker, Charles Jenkins. Charles is a veteran of the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, serving there more than 35 years. He's currently the chief of the Bureau of Environmental Engineering and Permitting and oversees the environmental planning, design, loan application, and project management aspects of these programs. So Charles really knows the ins and outs in these programs, and we're thrilled to have him join us this morning.
Good morning, everyone. So today I'll be talking about the funding opportunities through New Jersey State Revolving Fund programs. There are two funding programs. One is the Drinking Water SRF and the other is the Clean Water SRF. So today I'll be focusing on clean water as it pertains to stormwater management. So the agenda, I'll go over some of the basics of the program, our funding sources, what governs how we use the funds, how to apply, what's eligible, technical assistance that's available, and then at the end with Ellen, I'll be available to answer any questions. So when the federal government issued the bipartisan infrastructure law, Commissioner Sean LaTourette took steps to implement the Water Infrastructure Investment Plan. So this was intended to capture the existing state revolving fund programs and then to highlight some of the add-ons that resulted from BIL and our program improvements that we are implementing. So when one goes to the DEP's website, there is a tile on the landing page entitled WIIP, and if you click on that, it sends you to this page, and it's kind of the starting point to get more information. So sources of funding, I won't spend a lot of time on this. We have various sorts of capital funds that come into the program, starting at the upper left, US EPA. Every year we get a capitalization grant for drinking water and stormwater. We are getting monies through the bipartisan infrastructure law, which I'll go into a little more detail later. We occasionally get some money from DEP that DEP recovers through damages. We get an annual allotment from the state of New Jersey. Federal funds require a state match, so that's where that comes into play. Off to the right, you see the state outline with the I-beam. That is the infrastructure bank. So the infrastructure bank is our financing partner that the department works with. The infrastructure bank leverages our funds, so basically we can take $1 and turn it into $2 of available funds for projects. And they assist us with a lot of the legal and loan management parts of what we do. And also we have repayments from previously awarded loans. So those all funnel into our capital accounts, and then that manifests as below market rate funding. So a basic loan is half of the loan is 0% interest through the department, and the other is at market rate interest through the infrastructure bank. And you will see later in this presentation, there are some augmented financing packages available for certain types of projects. And these are just some examples of projects. We We run the gamut from massive wastewater infrastructure and drinking water projects to repairs to stormwater to equipment purchases. So again, the start of the program all the way back to the Clean Water Act that resulted in the construction grants program, which ultimately involved into the state revolving fund programs. And our mission is to incentivize investment. So essentially, when it comes to financing anything that results in a water quality benefit or maintenance of water quality is something that we can fund as a capital improvement. So if anyone has any ideas that they may think are off the beaten track, we're always available to have a discussion on that, and we try to be as flexible as possible to get innovative projects into the program. So some of the benefits of the program: up to 30-year loan terms. The loan term is based on the useful life of the project. 30 years is the outside limit. Rolling applications. We accept applications at any time of the year. We do run on a state fiscal year cycle, so starts July 1st of any year and ends on the subsequent June 30th. So that really only comes into play in terms of if you like the financial package available in the current year. The incentive is to get your project ready for financing during that year. We are not anticipating any major changes in the program, but as I move into talking about some of the grant-like funding, there are limited pots of that money, so it's generally beneficial to keep a project moving and try to get it through to financing so those that are eligible can get that better money. Rolling awards. So you do not have to wait till the end of a given year to get the money. When your project is ready to move forward, we can finance it. So we can finance at two different stages of project development. If an entity needs money to work on their planning and design, they can come into the program, submit to us a professional services agreement that outlines what those tasks and costs will be, and we can move to a short-term loan closing to allow time to develop the project. So that time limit is up to 2 years. And then the other starting point for a loan is when a construction contract is awarded. And then at that point, the short-term loan could be awarded then. And that can last for up to 3 full state fiscal years to do the construction. So in terms of stormwater, usually the life cycle of construction is much shorter than 3 years. So we generally don't run into any problems. If for whatever reason a project does hit that 3-year mark and it's not all the way completed, I won't go into the details, but we do have a way to remedy that. So the so-called short-term loan, construction loan, they're the same thing. That loan is intended to cover costs during project development and construction. And that's a very low interest rate. It used to be at 0%. I think for the current funding cycle, it's less than 0.5% of interest. And interest is only charged on funds that have been dispersed. So if you get a $10 million loan and you've only pulled out $50,000 for your planning and design costs, you're only paying interest on that $50,000, not on the full $10 million. And I'm just throwing those numbers out as an example. And our goal is to try to get our project loan recipients into a position where they don't have any out-of-pocket costs. So sometimes projects come into us that are already well developed. Those costs have already been sunk. You could close on a short-term loan based on that planning and design professional services agreement, immediately get reimbursed. We try to be very fast on our turnaround of construction requisitions so that the loan recipient is not in a position where they have to use their own money to pay the contractor. So eligible recipients. So one of the requirements of the Clean Water SRF program is the applicant has to be a local government unit. And we've recently expanded to include private colleges and universities for non-point source, which is the subject of this conference. So any projects along the lines of stormwater would fall at a college or university would fall into that. So what we sometimes see is a community group or even a homeowners association. They are able to get the host community to sponsor their project. Then it becomes a matter of an inter-agency agreement to work out the financials of how costs are going to be allocated, but the loan itself would be issued to the host community. So not eligible, and I don't know that it's that relevant, but it's here for completeness sake, federally owned or military needs, and then privately owned wastewater treatment. So I just highlighted a couple of things that I thought would be relevant for today. Although all of the topics there we do cover as eligible projects. So stormwater management, we do gray and green. And that includes new as well as refurbishment or maintenance in terms of any repairs that are necessary. So we can't cover our ongoing operation and maintenance costs. We are a capital program. Equipment purchases, so in terms of stormwater management and watershed protection, things like street sweepers, vacuum trucks to help clear clogs. And then also the planning and design I mentioned. So let me loop back to this gray and green infrastructure. So gray could be things like basins and pipes. Green is not necessarily a plant. It also includes things like porous pavement. Drinking water, I'll skip over that. I just had that in there for completeness sake. So on the right there, you'll see clean water priority categories. And these are some of the major things that affect a project's ranking. So when a project comes into our program, it is ranked based upon various factors. These are all things that feed into the ultimate priority ranking of a project. So I'll get into this a little bit more, but we essentially have enough money to cover any contemplated project needs. So priority ranking usually only comes into play for our grant-like financing. So one of the things that can move a project to the top of the heap to get some of that special financing is affordability. Project affordability score of 80 or less. So that's comparing the host community's median household income with the statewide. It yields that ratio, and then depending on unemployment trends or population trends within the community, that can also affect the score. Coming back to the bipartisan infrastructure law. So New Jersey will receive almost $1 billion over the next 5 years. So we're in year 1 of the BIL. And that plays out to be about $100 million each year for clean water and $100 million each year for drinking water. And with that BIL funding, there is a directive that a certain amount of that has to be offered as principal forgiveness. So if you hear the term PF or principal forgiveness, that's a part of the loan principal that doesn't have to be paid back. We generally don't issue grants, but PF is essentially a grant. The intended use plan. So this is an annual US EPA requirement. All the SRFs throughout the nation have to develop their intended use plan that lays out the priorities for the upcoming state fiscal year. It identifies how projects will be ranked. It identifies the basic terms that projects will receive. And it usually includes in the state of New Jersey's case, a list of our existing project tally. So anyone that's gotten their foot in the door with a project that's on our project priority list will be part of the appendix to the intended use plan. So we also received in New Jersey a portion of the American Rescue Plan Act funds, and I won't go too deep into that. Those are mostly targeted to combined sewer overflow projects and drinking water projects that address chronic violations of drinking water standards. So this is the master chart from our intended use plan. that shows what's available for clean water projects. So working our way down from the top, you'll see CSO, which is combined sewer overflow. The fourth one down, water quality restoration. So that's a little bit of a catch-all. That includes things like projects that address harmful algae blooms or other water quality degradation that can be addressed through a capital project. There's also the affordability criteria, energy and water efficiency. So this doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a solar or a wind project. It can be something as simple as you have a leaky sewer system that lets a lot of groundwater into the system that ends up being treated at a treatment plant, and it's essentially you're using a lot of resources to treat clean water. So tightening up the system actually qualifies a project for that energy efficiency category. Below that is overflow and stormwater grant. So that is actually a grant. We received some money from US EPA to implement this category. We are looking for projects around the $1 million mark or less to address existing overflow and stormwater problems. We're not looking for $5 million projects and you get $1 million. We are really looking for a maximum of 1 million, partly to make more projects affordable and also to get smaller scale projects through the program. And there at the bottom, you see the base program, which is half DEP and half iBank money. So explaining the columns, the PF share, that's the amount of the project that would qualify for principal forgiveness. And then there is a maximum cap per borrower per year, per year. And then the projected PF available. So that's based upon what we've carried over from previous years that didn't get used, and then also additional funds that come in every year. So this is where project ranking may become important. One does not get the principal forgiveness guaranteed until a construction contract is awarded and a short-term loan is awarded. So that's an important thing to remember. If you come in for project planning and design and we tell you, yes, your project is eligible for principal forgiveness, that means the type of project you need does indeed qualify for that category, but we can't guarantee, we can't set aside the money until you're actually ready to put shovel in ground to move the project forward. And we do that so as the year goes along, we are trying to move on a readiness to proceed basis. So if a project comes in and it qualifies for that PF and it's ready to move forward, we certify the project and we do guarantee that principal forgiveness. And this is just kind of a rundown. Obviously, there's a lot more to it because it is a federally and state derived program. So there are a lot of specifics. I think I could be here for a half a day if I really covered all these points in detail. So kind of just beginning to end of a project life cycle. So it starts with a project coming into the program. We determine whether it's eligible for funding or not. We give it a priority ranking. Then the project moves into environmental planning. So this is a NEPA-like review, National Environmental Policy Act review. We are delegated by US EPA to do that review ourselves. Basically, description of the project, what the need is, what the alternatives are, the environmental and cultural resource impacts associated with those alternatives, any permitting required, and then the selected plan and costs. All that culminates in what the state calls the environmental decision document. You may hear people, if you interact with us, using the term EDD. Subsequent to that document, typically that's when we see a design come in the loan application. So we do require, in general, public bidding for projects. Certain things like a street sweeper that can be procured through a state-approved vendor, we don't require public bidding, but for the vast majority of our clean water projects, It will be a public bid and award process. Authorization to advertise, so that's an official letter from the state saying, yes, you may go out and procure. So one thing to keep in mind is the state, other than planning and design costs, the state cannot reach back before you come into the program. So if you have a project that's already underway in terms of construction, or you've procured materials, that is not eligible for financing. So anything associated with the state revolving fund project needs to go through this review and approval process from beginning to end. So again, the authorization to advertise, that gets the project out to bid. The authorization to award, that's another official state document. We, meaning DEP, certify the project to our partners at the infrastructure bank. Project moves into that short-term loan award, that 3-year time window to get the actual construction done. And then at the end of construction, the project moves into the long-term loan award. So that's when qualifying projects, the principal forgiveness is factored in to your loan terms. Any other special financing terms are factored in. The length of the loan is developed based upon the 30-year max, so the useful project life. And then at 1 year after that certification for a loan, then we require the project sponsor to certify that the project was constructed in accordance with the contract documents. Any glitches were repaired, everything's functioning, it's meeting its intended purpose. And I won't spend too much time on this. We have an online tool to both apply for and manage projects that we call H2 loans. It's overseen by the iBank. And the start is the local government unit's authorized rep contacts the iBank to get a PIN, and from there can delegate authority to other team members to put information into the system, to create projects, to upload documents to support the project, to do things like fill out the online loan application, request a meeting at the beginning of the project, which we highly recommend, so that we at the state know what your overall project is, if there are any special permitting or other considerations, what your projected timeline is to move the project forward. All these things we like to get a good idea of at the beginning, and then it's also our opportunity to educate those that aren't familiar with the program of what to expect. Technical assistance. So this is one of the add-ons that the Commissioner of DEP is really emphasizing, and we're putting them into these 4 main areas you'll see to the right. So a lot of times the big players, the people with the water treatment plants, with the sewage treatment plants, that operate large scale collection systems for wastewater. They've been through the program. They have an idea of how the program works. A lot of municipalities that are just getting started on things like stormwater management may never have come through the program, so they may need help in a number of areas. So one of them is program navigation. So that's, how does this program work? I need help. I don't even know where to start. Financial and needs assessments. So some communities struggle with defining, I know I need to do things, but I really don't know the full scale of what I need to do or how I should package it into manageable projects that make sense for the community. So that's where the financial and needs assessment comes in. On the financial end of things is, well, how much are these projects going to cost, and what's my plan? Can I do something now? Can I do a project every year for the next 5 years, etc. Community engagement. So this is very important. Getting the community involved in, this is what the host community intends to do to address their problems. Getting the community's input on that. And that is always a great thing. We do require, as part of the State Revolving Fund program, a summary of public involvement, and then depending on the level of environmental impacts with the project, we may require a public hearing and a comment period, but it's always best to get the community engaged right up front. And the community can help to define what the priorities are within that community. What does the community want to see done first? What is the community's tolerance for costs? You know, a lot of times municipalities struggle with directing money, but if the community really wants to get behind a project, that can influence the timeline and the scope of projects. And then the last one is engineering services. That's on the drinking water side only. There is another service that's available, and that's to assist with reviews as the projects progress. So this is the button on the WIP page that I mentioned at the beginning. This is where you would go to learn more about technical assistance and to request. So some of these programs we are just about at the point of launching, and others are still in development. So we are fully engaged in a request for qualification, a request for proposals from third parties that can help communities with these tasks. This is where you go on the WIP page to indicate that your community has a need for this type of assistance. And there is the link. And we do like to be available to answer questions. So I'm available via email, or we can set up a Teams meeting. That's how we typically do things. I think that's the way with most people nowadays, is team meetings. And we can just set aside a half an hour as needed and go over anything, you know, defining a project, eligibility, how to get started, what to do next. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Now the time for questions and answers. I will take one from the virtual world at this moment. I think this is for you, Charles. There's a great project focusing on eco-islands or floating wetlands. Essentially, there are at least 2 New Jersey folks I know of doing this work. Is that already being funded, or can it be funded?
So I'm not aware of that project, so I don't think that's part of our program. We would probably need to see more details, but in terms of if a constructed wetland serves to improve water quality or protect water quality, that's something we would be open to. So we also can finance things like stream bank restoration. My microphone. Okay. Stream bank restoration, or we have a very large scale project in the city of Camden area with Newton Creek, where that was almost fully silted in many areas. That's being dredged to restore water quality. The next phase of the project is measures to reduce runoff that contributes to that silt buildup. So I would say it's definitely worth a conversation.
Right. Do we have any questions in the room?
It's for the online.
Will there be consideration to ask the public or to advertise to the public that should they think they may be having a leaking septic system, that there's funds for them to have it checked so that they, or at least if there's funding, that they could find out and then have it advertised? Is that in the plans?
I can cover what we can do for septics. So what we can do for septics is if a community establishes a septic management district, we can finance needed repairs or replacements. One of the things involved with that septic management district is the host community has to set up protocols for how frequently homeowners need to pump out their tanks. If there is a problem with the system, what is the methodology for that repair to be put into place? So what we've seen so far, this is a long-standing ability of the program. host communities have been reluctant to get into that because they don't want to be in a position to tell a homeowner, your system's failing, you need to spend however many $1,000 to bring it into compliance. That's a real sticky issue on the local government side. In terms of testing, that's not really something we can cover. If a community is moving from a number of failing septics to tying into a regional wastewater system, we would cover testing to show that there are failing systems as part of the planning and design costs that we can reimburse to demonstrate, yes, this community has problems. Repairing or replacing these systems is not a viable alternative. We want to connect to the sewer system. Here's our background information, and that testing would be part of that background. But just as an ongoing O&M measure, we wouldn't be able to cover that.
I'll email you.
Okay. Sure.
Charles, I'm going to jump in with a technical question. You had a wonderful table up there with categories of projects, and one of the columns was the percent that was eligible for principal forgiveness. So there was a clean water category with 50%. Is that each and every project is available for 50%, or is it the totality of loans given in that category you will forgive 50%?
Yeah, I didn't cover that completely. I apologize. So in general, if a project qualifies for principal forgiveness, there'll be a maximum dollar amount available to that borrower in any given state fiscal year. And then there's a percentage. So let me just pick an example. The $2 million cap, 50%. That means up to a $4 million project, half of that money would be PF until it hits that $2 million mark. And then anything over that would then move into the base program funding.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. I'll take another online question. And actually, I'll put this to Charles and then Ellen. I don't know if Pennsylvania or other states do it differently, but does the water bank loan pay for or contribute to purchase of land to prevent private development, which may result in future water pollution from stormwater runoff?
Yes. So this was a big thing probably about 15 years or so ago, maybe 20 years now. And it's still part of our program. So communities can purchase land. It needs to be deed restricted and the only in perpetuity. And the only activity is passive recreation. So it can't be ball fields or a public park with picnic tables. It's generally a piece of land. Maybe it can have a walking trail through it, but that's really the maximum that we would allow on that land.
And that's from the water bank, not Green Acres or Blue Acres.
That would be through the water bank. So Green Acres has its own program, and we have ours as well. So it's kind of a little bit of a analysis to determine, because Green Acres usually has an upper top end of what they can fund. So we can step in if costs go above that, or if whatever reason the community's not interested in Green Acres, we can fund it in whole.
I didn't think that was going to be the answer.
Is that something, Charles, that gets funded through the Clean Water revolving fund or the drinking water?
That would be through the clean water.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I know Delaware has a source water protection program that allows purchasing of land, but it's through their drinking water SRF. So that's interesting that it's through the clean water.
It's through the clean water. The thought process back in the day was this land won't be developed, so it won't be contributing to the wastewater burden from development, and it won't be contributing to non-point source because it will not result in impervious cover or changes in drainage patterns that lead to erosion.
And how many communities have you had use that?
I think our last one was probably about 10 years ago. So I don't really remember. There was a special task group, and I was more of a hard engineering guy at that time. Definitely more than 10.
Great. I will note back to the septic question that some states allow for individual private landowners to access SRF dollars through a mechanism called a linked deposit. That's something you can do in, I think in Pennsylvania, that helps a private landowner. It provides some support for a local bank to provide a loan to a private landowner to actually replace that septic system. So just a different strategy.
Yep, we are aware of that. We're kind of working on that. The details of that haven't been worked out. So essentially, for the people online and in the room, the state invests its SRF dollars with a bank, and then that bank is the entity that finances the individual homeowner.
Just ask a quick follow-up. So if a municipality wanted to purchase land outside of their borders for flood or water quality protection, that they could be doing that through the water bank?
That's a good question. I'm not aware of any scenarios like that. I think I get where you're coming from. You know, water just goes where it's going to go. So the protective measure may in fact be outside of the municipal boundary. It's definitely worth a conversation.
Hi, is this on? All right, good. Yeah, sorry. So hi, thanks for your presentation today. You mentioned your prioritization rankings and kind of the theory behind that, but then said that you don't really have to use that because you've got enough money to go around. Why do you think that municipalities aren't beating down your door? Why do you think they don't know about it and aren't utilizing it?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure if there are that many municipalities that aren't aware. We have over 1,000 projects on our priority list. Right now, we have over 400 active projects that are in some stage of the application review process. So there are a lot of projects in-house that are moving forward. This conference is part of getting the word out. So also every year when we ramp up to issue our intended use plan, there is an email blast that goes out to all the municipalities of New Jersey, letting them know that the intended use plan public hearing is coming up. You can view the draft plan, where to view the draft plan rather, and then the process to either comment during the hearing or afterwards. Then we do prepare a response document based on comments received. So there's definitely been a much bigger emphasis on getting the word out since the commissioner's WIIP plan. At the very beginning, when we got the first allotment of bill funds, or were in anticipation of those funds, we had a very large stakeholder meeting, actually in more than one, where we wanted to get as many communities and not-for-profits and special interest groups involved in discussing how best to use the money.
So I'll comment on that just from my experience in Pennsylvania. So I did note in my comments that for a lot of communities, the idea of going into debt financing is an indication that they're not managing their finances well. And so I think that's a big psychological hurdle to get over, particularly with respect to stormwater management. But I would also note that it's really important to consider the size of the system. In Pennsylvania, for example, there are 3,000 drinking water systems, but only 175 of those systems serve populations of more than 10,000. So that means that if you're going to take out a loan, you're distributing the costs of that loan across a very small number of people if you're not one of those 175 communities. And so I think it's really important for us to understand when debt financing is a good alternative for a community and when it is not, and why it might not be a great alternative. I think Charles did a great job of sort of explaining that even though there are a lot of subsidies that are available for through the bill funding, the iBank is a debt financing institution. All of them come with debt as part of the package.
Hi, Andrew Philippi, Municipality of Princeton. We have used the Water Bank and iBank on a number of occasions. It's a fantastic program. A dollar saved is a dollar earned. But one of the things that we found is that there are more design, documentation, construction requirements going through these programs because there is national funding than if we just did a program or a project funded strictly from our own pockets. And so that especially hits hard with these smaller projects, which is part of why we haven't been coming more often. And especially with stormwater projects, they are smaller, at least for us now. But my question was actually going to be, have you noticed that with other communities? And do you have a estimate, I suppose, of what that additional cost would be, what the cutoff for the project size would be that really makes the loan forgiveness, not necessarily the principal forgiveness, truly worth the effort of going through this program?
I don't think we have a cutoff number because depending on the type of principal forgiveness that's available, it may completely cover project costs like that OSG category that I mentioned with the kind of the $1 million informal cap on it. That's 80% of the grant from EPA, 20% PF from the department. So there is no actual loan debt incurred on that type of project. And curiously, we haven't had any viable candidates come forward to the point where they've advanced the design and moved to construction. So that's a category we are really trying to emphasize. Speaking to the add-ons that result from federal and state oversight, compliance with state wage rates and federal wage rates is part of the funding. There are also some reporting requirements. There's a 10% goal in the program to utilize what we term socially and economically disadvantaged businesses. So there's a reporting aspect there. As far as the process to apply for a project, I would say our opinion is generally a good project's going to, whether it comes through our program or not, it's going to have planning, it's going to have a design, it's going to move through construction with a public contract. So in general, our project procurement moves through what's called local public contracts law informally. And that governs municipalities if they want to buy paper and pens all the way up through these large capital expenditures. So I can really only speak to, let's just take a vanilla project, a pumping station or a wastewater treatment system, that sort of job. Probably around the $500,000 to $1 million mark is where the savings really start to accumulate by coming through the program. But for these smaller projects where we are offering the principal forgiveness, it's really hard to say what that cutoff point is. And that's probably an important reason to indicate an interest in the technical assistance. We are hoping those third parties can assist communities like, well, I want to do 5 things, but I really only want to do 1. Like, well, maybe you should do 2 because then it reaches the scale that you're getting the benefit. If you only do 1, your closing costs on the loan or the cost for your legal team will outweigh the benefit. But instead of waiting to do the second out of 5, maybe put those 2 together into one project. So I'm just speaking in a generality, but that is one of the major reasons why we want communities to get involved with technical assistance, is to help them answer that question for themselves based on their own particular circumstances.
I did want to note just a couple other sources of potential technical assistance. So I don't know if this has been a topic at these sessions already, but New Jersey Future has funding to be supporting communities and accessing bill funding through a private entity, and the Syracuse EFC will have funding from EPA to be serving communities in Region 2, which includes New Jersey as well. So there's additional sources of TA as well. Although I don't know, Charles, maybe that is what part of the sort of the TA provision will include those two or not. I'm not sure.
One last question.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Is this working? Okay. So I have a situation, right? Say I was a citizen who has this well system, and say I was an environmental scientist who is now a source water protection ambassador. And I realize that if there's all the money in the world to make all the water clean, then why don't we have clean water? I know all the reasons we don't have clean water. But what do I do since my town has not filed a CCR for the past 2 years and there's contamination all around me, and you're saying that there's enough money to go around? What do I do to find out why my town isn't doing what they're supposed to be doing? Why my town isn't fixing the problem? And why am I drinking 1% from another source? 1% of the wells within my area are contaminated with fecal coliform. So that means one person within a square mile of where I live. So it could be me drinking fecal coliform. Why aren't there more? They didn't rate it on one site because they didn't test 10 wells. Why didn't they test 10 wells in my town if there's so much water pollution and there's money to fix it?
I'm going to
I could
start to
answer
answer
that briefly.
Go ahead.
So the financing program is not involved with permitting requirements or enforcement of permitting requirements. So I can't really speak to an official response to that question. My suggestion would be to contact the Division of Water Supply and Geoscience. They oversee the Safe Drinking Water Act. They oversee the permitting for potable water for New Jersey's enforcement arm. Division of Water Supply and Geoscience.
Let me give a plug for a program that we've run here at the Watershed Institute, which is called the Community Watershed Advocacy Program. Ma'am, we hear the concerns quite frequently, and this program is an effort to try to help people understand how they can make change in their communities or understand the processes that provide them an opportunity to. Yeah. Now, these are, I mean, as you've heard today, these are complicated rules and they're complicated funding streams, and there's all these, so we all have to work together to get the word out and educate more people on how to address these things. So we appreciate your efforts there and your frustrations that we can hear. But thank you all. We have now, and thanks our speakers again. Thank you, Charles, and thank you, Ellen.